Virgil Vandervoort leaned against one of the pillars framing the doorway of the Max Mara store and spit out a piece of tobacco from his hand-rolled cigarette. The man he was there to meet didn't permit smoking in his office, and Virgil was early. He pulled smoke into his lungs and held it for several seconds before exhaling.
Civilians think soldiers spend all their time fighting, if they only knew.
Virgil had spent thousands of hours waiting. The skill was to spend all those hours ready to act. The sun burned hot for early spring. Virgil had rolled up his cuffs to bare his forearms, but he still felt his underarms growing damp. He wanted to make a good impression today. Knowing he had this meeting, he'd worn khaki slacks instead of his usual blue jeans. He was determined to rise in the ranks. He heard the purr of a powerful engine. He leaned forward just in time to watch the black Bentley turn through the archway between windows for Jimmy Choo and Hermes. The tourists on this street had no idea what lay behind those gates in the middle. The concierge stepped out of his little office and smiled as he waved the car inside. The Sovereign Military Order of the Knights of Malta had first come to Virgil's attention when he'd heard that General McChrystal was a member. Virgil had been out of the service for a while by then, and while the money was good in the private security sector back home, he didn't get to see much action. He was bored. But he thought he needed the money to keep the wife happy. That didn't work out. Bitch divorced him and then refused to let him see his daughter, left him no reason to stay on that side of the Atlantic. When he went back to Iraq as an independent contractor, Virgil was tired of the indecision makers. He'd seen them on both sides, government and private. He was bored, and he wanted to see some action. Then he'd gone to work for Mr. Prince at Blackwater. There, they weren't bothered by all those rules of engagement. The means didn't matter much as long as you got results. Virgil always got results, and they'd paid him well for doing what he enjoyed. But when this new American president got elected, he brought in an entire administration of indecision makers. They started prosecuting men for getting the job done. Winding down the war, they said. Even though he didn't need the money, Virgil tried for a couple of jobs with other private military firms. The fellows interviewing him looked like they hadn't started shaving yet. Their questions were all about technology. He never heard back from them, which was all right by him. He wasn't going to do his job by sitting in a room playing with a joystick. So when he'd first learned about the Sovereign Military Order of the Knights of Malta from Mr. Prince, Virgil was able to afford to buy in. There in the order, he'd found his third career and a real home. Ever since the Crusades, they'd hated the fucking ragheads as much as he did. He took a long last drag on the cigarette, then dropped it onto the sidewalk and ground his heel on the butt as he stepped into the street. Time to get this done. The fat little concierge stepped out of his office again. This time he insisted on seeing Virgil's ID. The man was an asshole. It wasn't like Virgil'd never been there before, or like in a place like Italy, Virgil's white blonde hair made him easy to forget.
I know the way,
he said, turning his back on the greasy bastard and crossing the courtyard inlaid with the image of the 8-point Maltese cross. When he stepped into the foyer, Virgil was struck again by how quiet it was. Rome was a noisy, dirty city, and yet this palace kept all that outside. Tapestries covered the high walls, and on opposite sides of the door stood matching suits of sterling silver armor engraved with fancy designs, including Maltese crosses on their breastplates. Virgil reckoned everything in the whole place was an antique. At the top of the stairs, he knocked on a door, and a deep voice said something in Italian. Virgil assumed it meant come in. The man seated behind the heavy carved desk was the order's executive director, Signor Oscura. While the Grand Master was the public face of the order, this was the man who got things done. The large window behind his desk looked out across the rooftops toward the Spanish Steps. The backlighting meant the face of the man at the desk was always in shadow. Signor Oscura looked up and nodded.
Salve, one moment.
He went back to writing on a piece of fancy stationery. Virgil recognized the Mont Blanc pen in the man's hand, and he wondered what it would feel like to write with something that cost more than Virgil's first car. He clasped his hands behind his back and stared straight ahead. He was prepared to wait. Always. Finally, the man set the pen down.
So, what do you have for me?
Signor Oscura spoke perfect colloquial American English, yet the hint of an Italian accent remained. Virgil had heard that the man spoke more than a dozen languages.